When it comes to starting Boxcutter, there's three different ways to start it. You can either click the icon in the T panel. You can either go in the N panel and click on the words Activate Boxcutter. And then, of course, there's my personal favorite, which is just pressing Alt-W, which will start Boxcutter. And that's just been a thing over the years, and I've become a big fan of it. Anytime you want to exit Boxcutter, you can exit just by pressing W, which will change your active tool over to the selection object, with Alt-W being able to start it. So W, Alt-W is an easy way to remember exiting. Also, since Boxcutter is an active tool, choosing any other active tool is the easiest way to exit this, which there may be cases where you may want to exit out of Boxcutter to perform a general Blender operation and then return back, of course. When it comes to using Boxcutter, besides the obligatory just click and drag in order to use Boxcutter, you do have the option of either using the top bar, using the N panel, or using the D. However, personally, I like to use the D pie in order to get between my cutters quickly, with the majority of my work being delegated to the top bar area. When it comes to the top bar, there are a few preferences in this version. For example, under the display area of Boxcutter, we can choose if you want a simple top bar, if you want to have menu labels for all of the areas that are up top, which for the purposes of tutorial creation, I always have the text enabled, which I feel kind of gives a slightly more descriptive look to it. However, if you were a fan of having all your icons up top, like AR, you can always go back up top and enable that. But for the sakes of this tutorial, I'll be using simple top bar. Hopefully we talked about working out of the top bar using the D menu, and also how you have the option of the N panel as far as navigating and using Boxcutter. However, when you're in the thick of it, like let's say you're in the middle of a cut and you need your friend, we have a bevel, there's the Control D Boxcutter helper. The way it's set up is you're able to adjust the main parameter here. We added 3 preset parameters for users in case they need to make adjustments on the fly. In addition to being able to adjust your modifiers, you are also able to change the type of shape, which sometimes can be a little slow to update, but you just have to believe in. So we'll just draw a shape here. We'll press B to bevel, and just pressing Control D will bring up this helper. In fact, you can bring up the Control D helper before even doing the drawing. So for example, the base helper is expanded to have additional options. We'll choose Ngon and look at this from top view and just do a quick cut in here while holding Control to use our angle snapping, of course. And that's pretty much all there is to it. If you're trying to use the array, you can also use Control D to bring this up and add more segments to it, adjust different modifiers. In fact, I see that perhaps in the future we'll add the ability to remove modifiers in this panel as well. However, if you are needing to remove a modifier, just heads up, you can always press, for example, V adds an array, but V also removes it. B will bevel and allow you to adjust it, but B will also remove the bevel. So just a few things to keep in mind to make your time easier with using Boxcutter, but definitely give the Control D Boxcutter helper a chance, since it's so fast and nimble in the 3D view for helping you get around. Usually when it comes to using Boxcutter, I use the top bar and the D menu. The basic usage is just click and drag, draw a shape, let go, and it will apply. That's really all there is to it. If you want to keep the shape behind, you can hold Shift, which will allow you to keep a shape and then move it over and make adjustments, rotations, and whatnot. Also, you can hide it after the fact, just like I did there. However, if I keep this shape, it will hide on the next cut, and that is because in the behavior panel, auto hide is enabled. Now, comparatively, we can draw. Press L, which will make every shape live that we draw. And you can see that the shapes are just left behind for me to make fine adjustments to. And of course, with Boxcutter, you're only able to cut the shape that you have selected. So if I begin cutting in this case, I'm actually cutting the cutter itself, which can get some interesting results as well, especially if you want to get something a little more complex. Shift to live refers to drawing a shape and holding shift in order to bring it over into reality so that you can modify it, rotate it, and move it after the fact. A lot of questions I get is, how do I rotate objects? How do I move things? And the answer is shift to live. If you shift it to live, you can do a lot of things with it. You can use it with hard ops like I have here, because shapes drawn with Boxcutter are marked as bool shapes. But another use of shift to live is selecting a face and adding a bevel modifier in order to create what we call a back bevel. So to show that in action, we'll just draw a circle here, shift to live, we'll select this top face, and just add a bevel. And if we roll the wheel, it gives us a nice entry bevel on the way inside. And if we have snapping dots on, we can actually just play off the center point and do it all over again. So we'll select this face, just put a bevel on it, just creating a nice little interesting transition on the way in there. Of course, with something like this, we may need a weighted normal in order to get the shading to look just right, because Ngons aside, can't be dealing with no surface imperfections. We'll just put a circle here and just select this face and just put a bevel on it. So if you are ever needing to make any fine adjustments after the fact, or you just want to connect your Boxcutter work with some of the Blender traditional modeling tools, shift to live's there for you in order to help you just quickly get your shapes out there. And of course, what I'm showing here is the part of its integration with hard ops. However, we do plan to be adding back bevel to Boxcutter in the future once we solve a couple of issues. The first area of Boxcutter we'll go over will be modes. As you're probably familiar by now with cut, all cut does is just, we'll press L to turn off live, all cut does is just removes part of the mesh. Next to that is slice, which will slice out a portion of the mesh. If we go in edit mode, you can see that this mesh is still live, so I will undo that just to show you an alternative behavior for slice called apply slices. If we do slice now, this piece will actually have the slice applied, allowing us to deal with it without it having to grow to the size of its initial shape. The next shape is going to be inset. Inset's a classic. This has been added since 7.12. You can see for this shape, as I draw the box, that the mesh is just being pushed in, kind of like the red, except a little bit more interesting. You can also press T during this operation to make adjustments. In fact, when it comes to Boxcutter, there's a help panel here that, as you can see, is being updated as I'm working. But if you don't want all of this, we can just hover over and press A to close it, which is just a Blender thing. Or we can actually go to Tool, which is actually talking about only Boxcutter as far as help goes, and there are no buttons or dialogues in here, except for the start operation, which we'll be getting to. So now we've talked about inset. Next we'll talk about join. Join will create an additive box that is slightly offset into the original mesh, allowing for a more seamless transition. We can see that if we press Alt V in hard ops and actually turn on wireframe, we can see that it's connected properly with no interior faces being added, which can be something problematic. Green box is one of the more rarely used boxes in my work. However, it is a thing for users that require it. The next one is going to be knife. Knife is required for cases where you need to cut geometry into the mesh. Right here, all I'm cutting is just geometry itself, so I could actually come back and play off of this if I wanted. For example, Alt W will start this in edit mode and just take this point and use a little bit of hard ops here to turn this into a circle. However, in order for that to work, we have to enable loop tools. So more than likely I'll be going back and making sure it displays a dialog there. But now we can actually just come in here and just create quick circles, which is The original goal to do with this particular tool was to force these sort of things in. However, with Boxcutter it does get a lot easier. So the knife that you see me using here is the Intersect knife. That's the 3D version. If we look inside, we see that the Boolean gods have blessed us and we don't have any interior faces. However, as a backup, drawing in 2D mode will instigate the classic 2D box of 2.79, which was the knife projection box, which will definitely get a perfect cut every time and not result in any sort of interior face creation. So that is something worth checking out. So when it comes to using 2D, what I'm referring to is actually drawing off of the mesh. If you draw on the mesh, it's actually a 3D creation. And now you can see that this one is just a little bit less seamless than the 2D version. You can also trigger it by using the align to view, which we haven't got to yet. But this will just allow you to use knife project just every time. However, this is more like the traditional Boxcutter 2D box where you don't have surface alignment enabled. So just something to keep in mind. The next one is going to be extract. Extract is new to this version, so in order to show it properly, I will need to cut. I will press V to array, press R to change the axis that is being arrayed on. These hotkeys, of course, are displayed here. I keep losing it whenever I make a new file. If we choose extract, you will be able to draw a shape out, slice that out, and subsequently reuse it. So this is our follow-up to the custom shape. There will be a few support tools that will need to be made in order for custom shape to reach its true apex. However, it is something that we are working on slowly but surely. So continuing on, the final box is make. Make is a strange one. All this does is make a box. In fact, right now I'm in custom shape, which we haven't even talked about shapes yet. When it comes to make, you can just draw a box on top of a box. I mean, I'm using box. I could also do this with Ingon, circle, and custom. If we delete everything, you can also just draw on the grid floor. You can look at it from side view and draw a box and then extrude it out after rotating the view. And this is something that a lot of concept artists enjoy with Boxcutter. So anytime this workflow isn't working properly, I'm immediately notified because, you know, you're messing with people's livelihood. So that is MakeBox, and basically we've covered all of these in a nutshell. If needed, I could go over it more in depth in the future. However, a lot of the videos I post try to show some of the situational uses in which I come up with the stuff in my own work, but that should give you a basic synopsis of the modes in Boxcutter. When it comes to Boxcutter, there's 4 shapes for you to choose from. Starting off with circle. Circle's obvious, just draw a circle, choose the depth. Of course, there's follow-up things we can do to it, like press B to bevel a circle before we apply. Using the control snap dot system, we can also precisely grab that midpoint in the bottom of a face in order to give a circle what it needs the most of, another circle. So even while drawing a circle, you know, you can draw it, pause it, and actually press Control D to bring up the Boxcutter helper, which has been slimmed down for this version, and you can still change options throughout it. We even added support for people trying to go up to 128, you know, those mad lads. But for the most part, the Boxcutter helper is slimmer and now faster, and you still have the ability to make it transition through shapes. We'll leave this at 32. In the event that you use the helper and it doesn't allow you to click to apply like it does right here, for this reason, spacebar has been made to apply. This is related to a bug that we're currently in the process of tracking down. So if you do encounter it, just keep in mind that spacebar is there for you. I believe enter is as well. Let's go ahead and confirm that. We'll tab to drop the shape and press enter. And it looks like enter applies shapes as well too, so there's always something new to learn. The next shape we'll be discussing is box, which box actually has a variety of things to it despite just being a box. You can draw a box and hold Alt in order to stretch it. You can hold Shift in order to make it a uniform box if you're really trying to get the perfect box. And of course we'll use snapping dots to get that right down in the center. But box is my go-to weapon. In fact, 90% of the time, I just need box. Box is controllable. I know exactly what I'm getting. You know, you can trust anything that comes in a box. You know, if it's not in a box, then you maybe can't trust it. Someone may have licked it. For example, you know, if I want to just subtract or take all this stuff here and put it somewhere else, I could just draw a box, press Y. You know, only shape that's just so quick and up and at 'em when it comes to getting this sort of stuff done. And now I can just repeat this. I'll press Alt H and bring that back and adjust the scale because it just did not look right on that circle. We can't let that stay. But that's box in a nutshell. You know, boxes, let's actually go back to box, sorry. You know, when it comes to box, you can press B to bevel. In fact, before we continue, I should bring up the help area. We'll press B, or we'll click and drag, and then we'll press B for bevel, not B for box. And you can see that there's also another option here for Q, which is a contour bevel, in case you need a bevel that's going around to trim on the way in. We could press T to add thickness to it, and it's not just box, all the shapes have this. We can even cycle it through various other types of shapes. We could press V to add an array. In the event that your array is just off screen, you can't get it under control anymore, just press R, and R will re-array that array and get it acted right. So we'll click to apply, and continuing on, the next thing to discuss will be Ngon. Typically I use Ngon working from the side in case I need to just do some advanced takeaways. When it comes to Ngon, you click and drag for your first line, and then by holding control you can actually activate snapping, so we'll put a point there. And at the end you click to be done, or add another point, and then you click to definitely be done, because if you click twice in the same spot, you are finished. And if you click for the third time, laser cut. And that's really the gist of how Ngon works. You could triple click for laser cut, just call it a day. You can draw your final point, double click, and then extend it by rotating the view. Under the input area, we have allowed for all sorts of configurations to be controlled, from industry standard to the Maya key maps, and also if you're using Alt to rotate the view like I do sometimes. I don't even think I have it enabled right now. You know, video caught me lacking. So back to Ngon, you can also change your snap mode here, and we made it where now there's no longer an error that comes up whenever you use that. It was kind of driving me crazy. People were starting to point it out. You notice at this point of Ngon that the shape just doesn't look visually appealing. You can press H and that will actually convert to line, and now every shape I draw will be in this sort of line formation, which is just sometimes easier to deal with. I look at it like yarn mode, like Kirby's Epic Yarn, just drawing out some yarn with the power of a lightsaber, because it just cuts through everything. With the new file, we could talk about Custom Cutter. The strangest thing about Custom Cutter is that we'll select this cube and we'll press C in order to make it its own cutter. And you can actually cut an object with itself. And with every cut, the cutter will just keep evolving, becoming a crazier, more unique cutter. And this is kind of one of the first things I do in the morning sometimes. I'll just mark something as a cutter and just cut to oblivion, because as the lines get finer, you know, I just start to see possibilities in this stuff. But I definitely recommend everyone just take a cube, mark it with C, and just cut into it. You know, I think this should be like a PC benchmark of how many times you can cut into your shape. You know, I've probably got about 10 modifiers now. You know, Boxcutter's so hardcore, it can create all these modifiers so fast. I mean, not as fast as KitOps. KitOps is the fastest modifier creator in the West. You know, you can have one insert just add like 50. But more on that later. But as you can see, this is a shape I never would have been able to create just cutting boxes in here. You know, if I was starting in box and just adding details myself, this would have been unobtainable. So I've been looking at this and I'm like, this looks like a PC tower. I take this and I do strange things with it. Like, I'll add a cube and we'll use a little hard ops here, sphere cast, and let's actually give it 4 levels of sub D, and we'll shift select this and use C slash, and this is what we get. It's like a cutout of our randomness. So of course we'll just mirror this over, and we can scale this in to really, in fact, no, we can't. We could actually try this one more time. Let's delete this. Alright, one of these meshes has to go. And I probably actually made a mistake here trying to go back in the past and undo this. This button here will apply all modifiers. However, we have one modifier that isn't actually even disabled, or it's disabled but not removed, which will cause us an issue. So just to keep things running smoothly, let's just get rid of that from our previous mistake. And so now I'll insert a cube, and we'll just use sphere cast, which is just subdivision plus sphere via the cast modifier in order to make our lives easier. And we'll select this, shift select the main shape, C slash, and we have our shape right here. And of course we can scale things in and even rotate them to get the result that we want. I'm kind of doing things a little more experimental than normal because I haven't even tested this myself, but it seemed like it would be a good idea. So let's hope it works out for me, guys. So with this object, I'm gonna shift select this, use the hard ops Alt X mirror in order to mirror the top to the bottom using this object's origin. That's the only reason this other object is shift selected, is because I need to use its origin, because I rotated this to get this just right and looking nice. And now we can actually do that again, but we want to mirror it from X plus over to X minus or vice versa. And we're getting somewhere with this. And we can even mirror it one more time, just from back to front. Multi-axial mirror coming soon. And we are done. So if we just hide the sphere, we've created like a crazy custom cut framework, which I've been planning to use this for like the inside of a robot's head or something, but it's just one of those things I haven't gotten around to yet. So we'll just make a new file and continue talking about Custom Cutter, because that was pretty much just me talking about just self-cut. So for custom to best be shown, at least with this latest version's extractor, we got to start off with the right tool. So in the D menu, I've already set it to Ngon. We're just going to create some Ngon cuts here and look at it from the side and just get in here and just really just work a shape in here. Nothing serious. One of the things I like to do is draw a box, just bevel both sides to death. Great care has been taken to make sure that overlapping points don't cause geometric shading artifacts, because that was a concern of mine. So we'll just do a couple more cuts in here. So with box selected, I can actually just draw a shape over this and press Y to switch to extractor, which is just my favorite way to extract. And we'll just take that piece out. So now we're back on custom, and it's been populated with the extraction. During draw, you can press tilde to rotate it. So we'll rotate it to get the shape that we want. And we can still even rotate even during this extrusion, just in case we have doubts that it's not correct. There, I accidentally beveled it, which will not work with the custom shape. But you can see that repeating an area that you just cut in is easier than ever with Custom Cutter. There's still a lot of uses that we're trying to figure out for it as far as this path going forward. So of course we're always welcome to hear whatever ideas you guys come up with. We'll just scale that on the Z and bring it up, and that should give you a pretty good idea of the cutters that you have at hand here. So we have circle, which can basically be, triangle, pentagon, hexagon, but mainly a circle. Box, which is box or cube. Ingon, which is any shape that you draw. And then custom shape, which is any shape, period. And then you have your two draw types, which is your corner draw and your center draw. Whenever you use circle, circle will always default to center draw because that makes more sense. It just makes your life easier. No Ovaltine, please. Great care has been taken to make sure that no ovals are ever created. With Ingon, you have options for snapping, and with custom, you can mark any shape in a collection to recall from as well. This might be a good point to interject as well that, let's say that you have a shape that you like. In a simple shape like box or circle, you can just control double click in order to repeat your last shape, which we could see that it did not work out here. It actually tried, but created some sort of crazy overlap time paradox. So let's see if we can figure this out. It looks like it put the first one precisely on top, which creates something called a hotline. And then it put this one here. And we could also continue repeating this. However, this sort of repeat isn't the most precise. So if I repeat this way, I also like to hold shift. So that way I control shift, get the shape in order to play with it. And then I'll just do that again in order to work a nice transition downwards, which I believe I already showed earlier in this video, but you get the idea. So continuing on. Finally, we are on to operations, which is basically our modifiers. Usually I don't have modifiers active before I start an operation. However, we'll just jump over to array, and now you see that whenever I draw a box, it's already being duplicated. To make this easier for you, I'll press the N panel and we'll enable the help so that you can see the array in action. You actually don't have to have this as your start operation. You can also press V during the operation in order to bring this sort of stuff up. The next one is solidify. However, with array, just to give it a proper explanation, in the event that you're arraying, right, and your shape is distant and far and you can't get it back and you're like, what's going on? Do I have an array or not? You can always just press R and that will reset it and bring it back in for you to attempt to send it on out into the range again. And if things fail, just press R, bring that sucker back home. And if you ever need to just quickly change the orientation, just press R and you'll be able to rotate it around the axis of your initial draw. So we do plan to add gizmos and more systems on top in order to make it more intuitive in the future, akin to our all-text mirror solution being a very adequate solution. We want to bring that sort of level of quality to the modifiers as well. However, at this time, R is the best solution we can offer with the limitations that we're dealing with in place. So the next one we'll talk about is solidify. So if I draw a box, now you see that this box has received solidification. An interesting note about solidification is if we press T, you see that it only goes one direction. If you press 1, 2, or 3, you can actually change the offset that it goes. However, this sort of solidification cutting results in a surface differential, which isn't always what I'm going for. So we actually have Boxcutter default to being on the outside. So let's bring that back. We'll switch to 1. And no matter how I cut this at this point with solidification, it won't mess up that surface in case I really need that surface to be level for some other trickery that I have, planned for later. So bevel's the next one. And as you can see, bevel has some options here, not enough options if you ask some users. However, we'll be addressing that in the future as well. And you can see that I'm just able to just draw a box that's just automatically beveled. So as a bevel box loving man, you'd probably be like, hey, how come MX doesn't use this more? It's just, I don't know. I just don't know. I should. I mean, it's awesome and it works. You know, I won't be writing bugs about. I won't be writing bug reports about it to proxies. So, you know, that's my review. But bevel box, just nice. However, you know, the real thing is if I convert this to a custom shape, it just won't be easy to scale versus having a box I could just add the bevel in post as a post effect. It's probably what it is, you know, if you really get down and think about it. However, having the bevel automatically scale without jumping over, even for these small drawings, is definitely quite amazing, and I'm glad that to see bevel actually not choking as I draw smaller and smaller shapes here. So just a testament to the power of the bevel here. Continuing on, actually, let's continue on with bevel. With bevel, you're able to bring it down, but you can also press Q in order to do a contour bevel. We can press B to adjust the amount of bevel going on. So this is what we call the quad bevel, which is just a all quad bevel. If you want something more traditional, we can turn this off. And this is actually the kind of bevel you would normally expect from Blender. So let's apply that. We'll press Alt V and look at the wires. And you can actually see the difference between the two. But there's also one more thing about the bevel. I keep wanting to jump on to the next one, but let's talk about this. If you press B and you bring it all the way in and bring it all the way out, chamfer. Bring it back out, bevel. Bring it in, chamfer. Bring it in, bevel. Bring it out, chamfer. I was playing with Shaper on the iPad. I was like, hey, that's pretty cool. So we were able to get that sort of functionality. Also add the Boxcutter should probably be a standard. The next one is mirror. Mirror is also one that I rarely use because I handle the mirror on an object level. However, during the drawing, even if mirror is not on, you can actually just draw using 1, 2, 3 in order to mirror on the X, Y, or Z. If you press 1 and your mesh disappears, that means that you need to press 1 again because you need to actually flip the axis in which your mirror has been calculated on. And this is definitely an improvement from the previous Boxcutter where you would have to press 1 and then shift 1 in order to flip it, which wasn't really the most ideal. So this, in fact, right here, I will have wanted to press 2. So if I was personally working, I would have the mirror handle things inherently instead of having to press 2 every single time. In fact, let's see if the mirror is going to actually keep control of the axis that I used before, and it appears to be a success. So that you do have that going for you, that if you do work in mirror mode, we can have this be consistently following the axis that you're working on. So if we jump over to the front here and we were wanting to mirror, we got to press 1 in order to get it working right. And now we see that the mirror is just picking up over here. So we see that the geometry that's been cut in here just looks terrible. You know, no denying it. You know, like I said, we N-Gon people, we got standards, all right? You know, so we have those quad people out there already judging us, but, you know, us N-Goners, you know, that's what we call ourselves now, we're goners. You know, we have standards, and right here where I'm just using a little bit of blue box to just cut this in, we'll right-click cancel because that failed. It requires a keen eye, you know, like some eagle sight in order to do these cuts just right. But as you see, now this is what I call music. You know, up here, we could be doing the same thing, just one little 3D box. However, I think there's mirror will work against you because I'm working on this side and then I'm just jumping over to this side. The mirror just isn't smart enough yet. However, that's something that I'll be pointing out to the chef and we'll be looking into in the next update. So even as I use these tools and I talk about them, there's always updates that are just coming up in my head that I could see of just systems needing to be improved and clicks needing to be reduced. I mean, look at me now. We've jumped into from modifiers talking about blue box, but that's all the modifiers in a nutshell. Array, bevel, solidify, and mirror, with more to come. I mean, as they become relevant, you know, we're not gonna, you know, one of the things I do want to have is a box that tapers. You know, we're just gonna press X and convert that. But it'd be nice to have a box that just tapered on the way in, just got smaller. You know, it's so easy in theory, but when we have boxes tapering in, that's something I look forward to. I just want to be able to cut knurl in now. So continuing on. So the most common type of orientation you'll be dealing with in Boxcutter is going to be using object, which means that there's a calculation system we have for finding the best orientation for shapes that you're drawing. However, whenever you start introducing strange angles in different directions, things get crazy, like right here. That's probably not the result you would want, and right here, that's not the result that you would want. And so there are a variety of solutions, like you know, we could cut this straight, parent all the subcutters to it, and then rotate it, and then do this. But this is why there are alternative fallback methods. So we're going to look at cursor. And when it comes to cursor, there's actually an input option that will make enable surface toggle map to Alt W, which I love. However, when we introduced it, it turned out to be a damn disaster. So what I'm going to do is just shift right click and just snap my grid here, and then just press R. Well, first I have to grab the axis and rotate. This version of the grid is a level 1 solution at this time. I believe that there are large degree of improvements that could be had with this to make it quite fast and far more optimal. However, this is here if it's something that you need. In fact, I'll just place this here, R, rotate, grab this, wrong axis. Like, I have to admit, the gizmo itself right here looks kind of crazy. We've talked a lot about it internally as far as what we wish we could do with it, and also ways to improve it, at least in the meantime. However, in this video I did want to at least go over how grid orientation works. I mean, this is probably not the most optimal solution in order to be using a 3D cursor for orientation. However, you are able to definitely get a lot farther than just rotating everything on the Z-axis afterwards with just using the object method, which, for the record, if we still use object, it's still not going to work. So probably best solution for this thing would be Alt W. Let's go back, and we'll just grab this Z, press R, and just get this to line up with an edge. There we go. Look at this from top view. Draw our box and take that out. So just an interesting little challenge here of getting in here and just cutting some interesting angle shapes. However, this is something that could probably be best handled creating it flat and using it as a custom cutter. I mean, there's a myriad of options that could definitely simplify this sort of workflow. However, if you're working on something like a robot and the shapes are sloping and moving around, then this is definitely a time in which you want to begin to get in the workflow of alternating between using cursor and actually using the object, because object will work a lot of the time, but cursor will work every time that you have it oriented. And in the future, we definitely plan to improve the way that the cursor system is at this time. I mean, anytime there's a struggle in a video, there's a talk to be had about, hey, how can we make this easier? How can we remove the headaches that are attached to such a thing? So continuing on, world is also here for you, which world is never to be used really. World is kind of a support part of MakeBox. If you're in world, you're going to be cutting like this, and it's just going to be weird. You're not going to like it. Same thing with cursor. If you jump to cursor and you're not aware that you're in cursor and you don't have the grid showing, these are gotchas where you'll just be, you know, let's draw from the Y, and as you see, it's just perfectly from the middle of the Y, because there's a an invisible fallback plane that's actually helping draw these. So these do come in handy for dots, which we'll go ahead and introduce now. Dots is the magnet. If you turn on the magnet, that enables snapping, and this will determine if you get dots coming up whenever you hold control over your edges, midpoints, and let's change this back to object, whether it's over your middle of edges, centers of faces, or vertices themselves. Which, speaking of, we did do a little bit of love and attention to make sure that you could do this with the circle and it not fail. By just rotating it ever so slightly, we prevent users from hotlining, from banking off of vertices, which is just one of those things that we noticed definitely was not a very fun time. Like, this is what it looks like when it doesn't do that calculation right. And we just rotate it just 0.002 degrees and it's right again. So there's something that we'll probably be having to look into after this. But continuing on, the dots is there for you. In fact, the system that we went for was a little bit different than what we were seeing. I wanted something that was more of a lottery. I wanted a chance that 1 out of 4 of these dots were a winner. Like, for example, we don't display a ton of dots because the winner is always within reach, is kind of the approach that I had in mind for it. Right here, we actually are no longer able to grab the center dot of our cut here. And I don't know why. Let's press Alt V and look at it, and it doesn't look like it would have an issue with it, but it's like, hey, how do we solve it? Well, I'm going to press 2 and press Alt H to bring back this shape. We're going to go to layer 1, and I'm going to shift select the main shape while also having this selected. And we're going to use something called active only, which active only as a behavior. Also, I'm probably going to move these back to the bottom. With active only, we can use the dots of a cutter to prepare our cut. So now we can just get in there and just cut using that shape. And more than likely now we can get in there and just work this area again. And active only can come in very handy. We'll go back to this shape, Shift A over here, and what we want to do is actually go to box, and we'll select the main shape and then select the sub shape that we want to jump off of, and make sure that active only is enabled. Let's see, 1, 2. There we go. And we'll just pull out a box, but we'll press Y in order to jump to extraction. And now we've extracted that piece out, and we're even able to draw it straight in other places. So it worked out for us in the end. Initially I thought there was a bug going on here, but it appears that that's been resolved in this release. So you should be able to have some fun with this. But in addition to the 3 orientation systems, we also have the gizmos. We've already talked about the cursor gizmo, but we haven't talked about the transformation gizmo. So if we enable this, it's not much use on the main object, but if we bring up a cutter, like for example this one, we can hover over this and see that if you hold shift and drag it, it will duplicate an object. That's cool, or cool to me. You know, it comes in handy if I need to duplicate those booleans. However, I do know that we do have some work ahead for us as far as making this particular gizmo smart as well. These were our initial attempts at adding gizmos to Boxcutter. You also have options like Control Shift Click in order to reset the axis in the event that you're needing to reset these objects as well. But that is pretty much it. And I hardly ever use those except for duplicating things and resetting the rotation. However, this button here is for View Align, and it's been located in a couple of different places further down the bar. However, now we have it next to the orientation objects because it just makes sense, you know. And with view align, that means that if I go and draw a box, this thing's going to be aligned to view. If I get here and I draw a box, this box is aligned to view. And because I'm in perspective, it's terribly aligned to view. So if we go in ortho, we could definitely just cut things off visually. And this is classic Boxcutter 2.79 behavior right here. We always have this as a fallback, so it definitely has its use in workflows. So in the event that you're trying to draw something just flat on the surface without any sort of issue, then that is something that you want to try out, because sometimes the surface orientation, if the normals are just going a different direction, it's just not going to work out for you. So that's what that's there for, is just as a fallback. But you know, not to downplay viewport orientation, because this thing is something that I use all the time. Alright, so continuing on, the next thing we'll be talking about is snapping. When it comes to snapping, there's two different systems. There's the increment snapping, which here we have it turned on. We also have lock on, which means it'll snap without control. And you see that it's constraining it to 0.02 increments or 0.2 increments, even on the extrusion. So this one I rarely use because I'm not trying to create Minecraft, but the rest of these are more critical. However, this one, you know, we'll come back to, but these three are the ones that matter, and verts really almost doesn't even matter so much. So in the event that I wanted to put a box precisely in the center of this box, I can just hold control and just grab this snapping dot here and just draw a shape using left mouse click and drag, let go, do the extrude, bring a shape down. If I wanted to put a piece here, I can use the edge midpoint. This object, since it's an Ngon, the face is right here, which normally is useless, but you know what, we're gonna just play off of that and bring this piece in. And then we'll just use the D menu to switch to circle and hold control in order to pull this in, and we'll just create a couple of pieces here. And for this, what I want to do is actually select this. We'll use the D menu to turn on the gizmo, and we'll just move a piece over here just to keep that symmetrical. But with that, you should have a pretty good idea of how we approach using the different types of dots. Right there, it appears that I had something sitting on top of something, so we'll turn off the transformation gizmo, and let's actually look in there and see what's happening. So someone's hotlining, and that hotline is happening right there. You see that if you have an edge laying on top of another edge when you boolean, it's going to cause you some issues, which is why we try to take some great care in automatically rotating this, which may not be working whenever you play off of the edge as well. I think that's what's going on. It's because I played off of the edge, it didn't go through. So, however, with vertices, there's definitely a small degree of rotation that these shapes go through in order to keep them from having that same issue. Right here we see that it became problematic, but we'll just press Alt H and bring that back and press RX and just rotate it any degree in order to get that corrected. So I'm just going to make a new file, and we're going to delete the cube, and I just want to show the last snap method, which is grid. Because I'm using world on Z right here, my world is on Z, not any of these, even under object, I'm able to just select the center dot, hold Alt, and bring this shape up, press B to bevel, click to apply, look at this from side view, and just get in here and begin giving this shape the business, and using the awesome snapping dots that now we've discussed in depth and y'all should be more than well aware of and aware of how to use. We can just get in here and just create shapes exactly where we need them. So the idea for dots in Boxcutter was to create a system that wasn't so much a lottery. The only dots that we see are primarily winners, except for that one. That one's a loser. That one's a winner. That one probably not a winner, but that one, he's all right. That one could be played off of. So it's almost like a dots probability, but just let you know that there are snapping systems there for you in the event that you need to try to bring in some sort of precision to your life. However, we are of course open for suggestions on this as well as on ways to improve it in the future. But I think with Blender improving their precision snapping tool set inherently right here, instead of adjusting the bevel with moving the mouse, which, oh, I guess I could just do that. I was actually going to use the Control D helper for that. But with that, we can move on to the next part. I believe you guys got the idea. I figured everything else about Boxcutter we could just discuss in closing. So the majority of the time that I'm using Boxcutter, I'm working in non-destructive. I mean, what does non-destructive mean? It just means you're not applying your modifiers. It means your modifiers are dependent upon other modifiers, which I can live with to an extent until there's times where I need to apply them. And for that reason, there's this apply button that's right next to things. So if you click that, everything will just be applied. Now, alternatively, I could just work in destructive, which destructive has been improved for 7.13 and made to be very destructive. However, there's something about having your booleans be done with the moment that you draw them that I'm just, you'll never catch me using destructive. I'll always prefer to draw it, have the ability to modify it slightly, make decisions on it, and finally decide if I truly want it maybe 50 cuts later, and then from there I'll go ahead and apply it. So anytime that you need to change that, it's right here. However, that option is always at the top of the behavior panel as well. So whenever I'm talking about the behavior panel, I'm talking about this thing. The pause button here indicates if the shape cuts before or after the operation. So right here, we're just drawing a shape. In the 2.79 version of Boxcutter, we had like this cool dotted line view that would show exactly what's being prepared to be cut out. Without it, it's just a block over it, you know, so it's not as intuitive as it used to be. However, in the event that you're working and you're needing speed, that is the goal of the play pause button, is that if your computer's fast and nice, like this Threadripper is when the moon is full and you give it a full vial of cat's blood, then this AMD computer is working like a champ, and then I don't have to turn on pause. I actually never turn on pause mode because if this computer starts choking, I'm just going to get on the nuck. But continuing on, I promise I'm not going to talk about computers. Continuing on, sort modifiers is something that I did an entire video about. We'll just make a new file, and I'm going to take this object and C# in it. However, the workflow that I'm using for this is angle, which means that with the system that we have here, it will sort using, you know, we don't even need to have this on right now. Now it will cut using the bevel. However, let's make a new file, and what we'll do is use a modifier to set this, but we'll actually hold control and click bevel in object mode to put a bevel here. So we have two bevels at play. Now at this point, you would actually want to use the last bevel option, which will ensure that the cut that you cut only affects the right bevel. Otherwise, it's going to affect all bevels, which can be quite irritating. So continuing on, keep modifiers determines which modifiers are being kept at the time of draw. You can see that almost all of them are checked except for screw. And just to show you that one in action, since screw is being used on circle, if we draw a circle and we hold shift, we can see that this modifier is still being kept live. So we could actually go under modifier and even adjust the settings of the screw. I forgot about that. We could actually adjust that right here if we were trying to be non-destructive with our cutters as well. However, usually once I cut something, if I see it looking good, then I'm going to move on with my life. So keep modifiers, sort modifiers. Hopefully that was a good synopsis. I don't feel it was. The rest of these modifiers also play their role. Just to show something newly added to this version, we're going to add a remesh modifier using hard ops. And to see it in action, we have to turn on wireframe. And if you have remesh turned on, now booleans will appear before the remesh, which this thing is something that we're playing with. Proxy calls it Minecraft mode. I was just thinking that, I would firstly never use this, but it does give us a nice grid formation, and it's kind of trippy to see how it swings through the jungle, it slides through and just starts making its way. It's an interesting system to see in action. I mean, once Pablo's remesher makes it in, it'll be a done deal. We'll never be talking about this remesh again. But lowering the octreat that depth will make this work out better. But this is also another good example, kind of showing you what sword is for in action, with the keep modifiers being related to the cutters themselves. Hence, all these are being listed as things that happen to cutters. Definitely never need a lattice to stay checked. So we'll make a new file again. Keep active only. We already demonstrated as using one mesh as a jump off point. So let's say I wanted to do a particular cut here using a grid, and just for the sake of it, we're going to convert it to wireframe. And that's not the wireframe we want. We want that one. We want to rotate it 45. And so let's say we want to use this grid to cut here, because that's easier than using our grid at this time. That's what we're working against. We're working against Blender's own tools. We got to get better than just using just a traditional grid as a grid. But believe me, it's something that I ponder and think about all the time. And it's always just a matter of time. These battles are things that we fight, and then we look back in retrospect and we're like, what's next? But believe me, there's always something next. So active only definitely has its place. I cannot live without it. For example, right here, I'm going to use RXX in order to rotate it on the local X, and then I'm going to have to use E to extrude it the opposite way. But in order to just cut these sort of cuts, the grid's just there for you. It's great. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what active only is for. Quick execute is a popular one. This one will allow you to draw shapes, and then immediately it will jump to laser cut. So it's just the quickest way to just shred something without having to go through the extrusion process. Of course, if you're playing with these options, you should be aware that they're on, because we have people write us all the time just like, hey, Boxcutter is crazy. And then we look at it, it's like, it looks like you have some crazy settings on. So apply slices. If we do a slice, I showed this one earlier in the video, I believe, but if we do a slice and we press X and we take this slice and we tab into edit mode, we see that it goes all the way back to the beginning, which just sucks. We don't want to see that. I mean, we want to see that with this shape because it's the main shape, but not with this shape. If you have apply slices checked, it'll just make your life easier. So we'll just slice this area out. And if we look at this in edit mode, we see that only that slice is where it begins at. So it just makes our lives easier. Shift to active determines that if you draw a shape and hold shift, it'll shift that to active, versus the alternative being drawing it and actually additively adding it. Like right here, it's been additively added, which is something we would not want. Show shape is similar to pressing L. For example, now every shape I draw, let's undo that. Every shape I draw will now be kept live, but every shape I draw subsequently will be hidden, which is problematic. So we want to actually turn off auto hide, and with auto hide off, now we can just keep stacking up these shapes that aren't being hidden and being placed in another collection. So hopefully that should shed some insight there. Auto smooth, on by default, just ensures that the shapes receive a degree of smoothing and auto smooth to make sure there's a fine transition and no flat bevels being shaped in there. Auto hide we just discussed. Parent shape will ensure that every cut you make is parented to the main shape. I'll show you that real quick. And if we move this, you see that only the ones that were made with parent shape on are working with it. And I think due to some fixes with Blender and its ability to handle children transformations, this option might be more useful now and not have as many issues as it did before, because previously we had it as a default behavior, but it was just problematic, so we had to take that out. Auto hide we already discussed. Multi-edit means that we can have multiple selections here and make a cut and affect them both, except we want to turn off active only, and we're able to just work between them both as long as they are both selected. In fact, we have show shape in here as well, and with that, damn AMD, I forgot what I was going to say, but anyways, continuing on. So we have live shape on, or show shape, in addition to everything else that we were stacking up here. I'm pretty sure is what I was talking about. And let's see, what did we leave off on? Talking about multi-edit. Simple Trace is here as a relic. Simple Trace has been broken as of the depth graph update, and I was just about to ask if we could just get it removed in the meantime. However, I'd much rather get this thing working ASAP. So in the meantime, Simple Trace is just not working. That's really all I can say on that. I apologize for the inconvenience. If you didn't know what it was, then you're safe. But under shape, we have options for determining the initial settings for most of the start operations that we discussed previously. Under input, depending on your settings for Blender and your experience that you're going for, you may want to adjust some of these settings. But if you're using the same settings that I am, then this is pretty much all that you need. If we look under display, we see that there's an option for wires only, which is the toggle for pressing H during draw to toggle between drawing a wire and drawing solid. So if you ever need to toggle that, you can either press H or you can just do it there. Under hard ops, we have slice material, which if I open up a file, I can show you slice material. I also want to say at this part that Boxcutter has received an update as of me saying this right now. So that'll be 7.13_2. The first utility fix. The last one I think went through 24 iterations before we finally had it at a good state. But continuing on, in this file I have a bunch of viewport materials. You can see that they're different viewport colors, so they show up, which is essential for what I'm about to show. I'll just insert a cube and press Shift H to hide everything that isn't the cube, and we'll right click, enable the top bar, and jump into Boxcutter. So the final thing I wanted to show was the hop slice material area, which if we use slice, we can now slice and of course press M to cycle through the various types of materials in the scene, and it'll tell you what name it is at the bottom, as well as set that as the subsequent slice material. So in the future, we do of course plan to come back and make this support everything like it's supposed to in the previous versions with material cut. However, I did want to at least demonstrate it in this video, as well as ensure that it's working. So that's why there's been a bug fix. More than likely, if you're testing it, you may encounter a bug with it, but if you download the latest update from the sales page, you should be good to go. So with that, I'll wrap up this video that was an introduction to Boxcutter, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.